Welcome to Le Weekend, the bonus extended podcast episode for France News Brief. In case you missed one of our dailies, we've put together a convenient way to catch up on the stories from the past week in France, plus additional content about something related to culture, art, history, or current events at the end. If you enjoyed our daily updates, you'll find everything you need right here in a seamless recap of the week's most important headlines. Perfect for those who want to catch up in just one episode, Le Weekend is designed to keep you informed and engaged with a lighter touch at the end. Let's dive in. This is the news for Monday, December 15th. French senators have approved the 2026 budget bill today, setting the stage for high-stakes negotiations between both houses of parliament at the end of the week, as reported by Reuters. Farmers blocked roads to protest cattle culling measures. On Saturday, dozens of tractors blocked traffic to protest what they see as the government's heavy-handed response to an outbreak of nodular dermatitis, as reported by Le Monde. The Louvre Museum in Paris closed as workers began a rolling strike. Staff demands better working conditions and urgent renovations, disrupting access at the world's most visited museum at one of the busiest times of the year, as reported by France 24. The first urban cable car was unveiled in the Paris region. Gondolas floated above a cityscape in the southeastern suburb of Paris on Saturday as officials unveiled the first urban cable car in Paris as part of the metro public transport network, as reported by RFI. This is the news for Tuesday, December 16th. The French National Anti-Terrorism Prosecutor's Office in Paris requested a fine of 1.12 billion euros, approximately $1.3 billion, against cement company Lafarge and prison sentences of up to 8 years for the company's 8 former executives. They are suspected of having paid jihadist groups in Syria until 2014 in order to keep a cement plant operating there, as reported by France 24. Congolese ex-rebel leader Roger Lumbala was found guilty by a Paris court of complicity in crimes against humanity committed during the Second Congo War and was sentenced to 30 years in prison, according to an official, as reported by Reuters. A labor court ordered football club Paris Saint-Germain to pay Kylian Mbappé 60.9 million euros. The Real Madrid striker had claimed 263 million from his former club in court. In return, the club had countered with a 440 million request to settle the dispute, as reported by France 24. According to a new study by statistics agency ANSEE, the wealthiest men live 13 years longer than the poorest in France, compared to 9 years for women. The difference is linked in particular to access to healthcare and the degree of occupational risks, as reported by Le Figaro. This is the news for Wednesday, December 17th. Hackers pirated French Interior Ministry databases. 2 highly sensitive databases were targeted, the Judicial Record System and the Wanted Persons File, which tracks individuals considered to pose a threat to national security. Interior Minister Laurent Nunez said there has been no extraction of records at this stage, as reported by Le Monde. The National Assembly definitely adopted the 2026 Social Security Financing Bill, including the suspension of the landmark pension reform. This is the first budget bill passed without the use of the Article 49.3 bypass mechanism since the lack of an absolute majority in the chamber in 2022, as reported by France 24. French investment company Ardian announced the sale of its majority stake in Prosol, Grand Fre's main fresh produce wholesaler, to private equity giant Apollo. Sources said the estimate valuation at between 4 to 5 billion euros, as reported by Le Figaro. France is probing foreign interference after malware was found on a ferry. The Paris prosecutor's office has opened an investigation after a Latvian national was arrested and charged over the discovery on a passenger ferry of malware capable of allowing the vessel's operating systems to be controlled remotely, as reported by Le Monde. The joint fighter jet project is very unlikely after ministers' talks, according to sources. A meeting between the French, German, and Spanish defense ministers last week failed to yield a breakthrough, rescuing the troubled French-German-Spanish warplane program, according to people familiar with the matter, as cited by Reuters. This is news for Thursday, December 18. France is not ready to sign a European Union trade deal with the Mercosur bloc of Latin American countries. French President Emmanuel Macron said ahead of a EU summit in Brussels that more work needs to be done on reciprocity and controls on products, as reported by Reuters. President Macron criticized Facebook for failing to moderate an AI-generated video announcing a fake coup d'etat in France, despite it being flagged on the Pharos platform for reporting illegal content, as reported by France 24. France deployed the army to accelerate the vaccination of cattle against lumpy skin disease, seeking to contain an outbreak that has fueled a new wave of farmers' protests in southern France, as reported by Reuters. French lawmakers today unanimously approved a bill exonerating women punished for abortion before it was legalized in 1975. Between 1870 and 1975, more than 11,660 people were convicted for performing or seeking an abortion, according to official estimates, as reported by Le Monde. Ticket inspectors on public transport will be able to wear body cameras starting on Friday. A decree published today permanently allows the use of video and audio recording by body cameras worn by public transport inspectors on trains, trams, buses, and metros for prevention and deterrence purposes, as reported by Le Figaro. This is the news for Friday, December 19th. The French economy is expected to post modest but steady growth in the coming years, driven by a recovery in household spending and business investment if political uncertainty clears, the central bank said in an update to its long-term outlook. Banque de France now projects GDP growth of 1% in 2026, compared to a 0.9% earlier projection in September, as reported by La Tribune. In the absence of an accord on the budget, a special cabinet meeting will be held on Monday evening to approve a special law to avoid a financial deadlock. The government warned that this legislation is merely a temporary fix. It is impossible to get through the year without a budget bill, as reported by Le Monde. The government called for a Christmas truce with protesting farmers, warning against further blockades during the holiday season, a move the country's main union said depended on the Prime Minister's response to their demands, as reported by Reuters. The strike has ended at the Louvre Museum, which has reopened as normal. Unions indicated, however, that the strike notice is maintained due to a lack of sufficient progress in negotiations, as reported by France 24. Farmers carried out what they said was a symbolic action in front of the private home of the presidential couple in the seaside resort of Le Touquet. Manure waste and a mock coffin were placed at the entrance of the residence. The protesters were denouncing in particular the Mercosur agreement, as reported by TF1. You are listening to Le Weekend. And now that we're all caught up with the main headlines from the past week, it's time for our focus story. Today we're looking at France's demographic turning point and why it made the news this week. France reached a milestone that would have been unthinkable to previous generations. For the first time since World War II, the country recorded more deaths than births, according to the annual report of the Institute for Demographic Studies published this week. Health Minister Stéphanie Rist said in Parliament that for the first time since the post-war boom, the curves between the number of births and the number of deaths have crossed, referring to it as a historic turning point. The minister added that approximately 1 in 8 couples of childbearing age experience difficulties conceiving a child due to multiple factors. In 2024, mainland France registered 629,000 births compared to 630,000 deaths, leaving what demographers call a natural balance at the lowest since 1945. Although slightly higher in urban areas, the decline in the number of births affects all types of territories, and it is likely that it will continue in the coming years. The report explains that the population continues to grow, but at a slower pace, due on the one hand to the decline in the birth rate, due both to a decrease in the number of women of childbearing age and to the decline in fertility, and on the other hand to the increase in the number of deaths caused by the aging of the population. A report by France Info provides the example of Rita, aged 29, in a relationship with a permanent contract, who earns a good living but does not feel ready to have children. Rita says that having children is more often seen today as a sacrifice rather than an accomplishment. Especially when you're a woman and you work, Rita said, starting a family is a bit like sacrificing yourself. She added that the world today doesn't necessarily make you want to have children. Even as a young adult, it's difficult to build a life for yourself, to own property, and to find a stable job. For most countries, the report may be just another data point in a global trend toward lower birth rates, but for France, it touches something deeper, a demographic anxiety that has haunted the national psyche for over 150 years, a long, complicated relationship with what the French called dénatalité, the fear of population decline, and how that fear has shaped everything from family policy to national identity. To understand why this week's announcement matters so much, we need to go back to September 1870, when Prussian artillery surrounded Paris and Napoleon III's army surrendered at Sedan. The crushing defeat in the Franco-Prussian War was indeed a military humiliation, but also a demographic wake-up call that would echo through French politics for the next century. France was being outbred by its rivals. In 1800, France had 30 million people compared to Germany's 15. By 1900, Germany had overtaken France with 40 million people each, despite France having twice the population a century earlier. While Britain's population tripled during the 19th century, France's grew by barely a third. Even more dramatically, if France's population had grown at the same rate as England's since 1760, there would be more than 250 million French citizens today instead of 68 million, according to the 2023 report, as cited in a post on Work in Progress. The French ruling class looked at these numbers with growing alarm, as many believed the country had lost the triumphant vigor of the Napoleonic First Empire. As early as 1849, a French parliamentary deputy declared that the first element of power is population, and on this point, France is in full decay. The reason for France's early fertility decline remained debated by historians, but the response was swift and sweeping. The National Alliance for the Growth of the French Population was formed in 1896, creating prizes for parents of large families. Cultural figures joined the campaign. Émile Zola published his 1899 novel Fécondité, which dealt with the particular problem of France's declining birth rate at the end of the 19th century, contrasting the happiness of a family with many children against those who chose to limit their reproduction. Zola's novel deals with the particular problem of France's decline in birth rate at the end of the 19th century and, more generally, with the problem of decadence and cultural renewal. The trauma of World War I turned demographic anxiety into national obsession. France lost 10% of its active male population, and the births that were foregone by potential fathers being at war caused a drop of 3 million in the French population. By 1920, a new law strictly regulated abortion and contraception. The interwar years saw France's demographic position deteriorate further. France's population grew modestly from around 40.7 million in 1901 to approximately 41.5 million in 1939, just before World War II began in September 1939. This represented a net increase of about 800,000 people over nearly 4 decades. The overall growth rate was low, averaging under 0.2% annually, reflecting declining birth rates and a demographic stagnation unique to France compared to faster-growing European neighbors. And it was only thanks to immigration that the population didn't stagnate completely. Meanwhile, Germany's population grew to 60 million, 50% larger than France's 41. The crisis came to a head in 1939 with the passage of the Code de la Famille, the Family Code, a complex piece of pro-natalist legislation that would shape French family policy for generations to come. This was the first attempt at a comprehensive family policy in France, introducing a progressive system of family allowances that increased dramatically with each additional child, cash incentives for stay-at-home mothers, subsidized holidays, tax benefits. There were even restrictions in place on the sale of contraceptives, which persisted until a new law in 1967. This legislation aimed at creating a pro-family climate throughout French society. The military even got involved. Army barracks hosted pro-natalist propaganda sessions for young recruits, with delegates distributing pamphlets, brochures, and posters to soldiers across the country. What's remarkable is that core elements like family allowances and maternity protections endure today. Modern France provides generous parental support. Initially, the legislation seemed to work. France's fertility rate recovered spectacularly after World War II. The baby boom saw the French population rising at an annual rate of close to 1% in the 50s and 60s. But now, the old question has returned despite all the generous policies. Just a few weeks ago, in November, the Senate approved 2 months extra paid parental leave from January 2027 onwards as part of a demographic rearmament plan to combat the country's falling fertility rate. The Senate approved the extra parental leave as part of the new Social Security budget, which is pending at the lower house. The Connection reports that the extra leave is set to come into force from January 1st, 2027, and will not replace existing parental leave, but be added to it. Currently in France, eligible mothers are entitled to 16 weeks of paid maternity leave, of which 6 are to be taken before the birth, and eligible fathers to 28 days of paid leave, including 4 days of compulsory leave after the birth. The number of weeks increases with each extra child. And parents who are adopting are also allowed 16 weeks to be shared between them. And yet, the fertility rate has fallen steadily since 2010, dropping from a peak 2.0 to 1.62 in 2024. What changed? Partly, France is experiencing the same pressures as other wealthy nations: delayed childbearing, economic uncertainty, changing gender roles, and the simple fact that having children is expensive and time-consuming, even with state support. At the same time, deaths are rising as baby boomers, those born between 1946 and 64, reach their senior years. This demographic pincer means that even with continued migration, France's population is expected to reach 70 million in the next 2 decades, largely due to migration, according to a September report by statistics agency ANSEE. Demographers caution to keep in mind that the low number of births is exceptional, as numbers will likely be rising again in coming years because the considerable number of people born between 2000 and 2010 will be having children in the coming decade. The question is whether fertility rates will recover or remain below replacement level over the long term. For over a century, the French have worried that their civilization might be outbred, outgrown, and overshadowed by more populous rivals. Those fears led to the creation of one of the world's most comprehensive family support systems. Yet this week's milestone indicate that something else has changed in how people think about family and children, something that is not responding to larger subsidies or longer maternity leave. This question is an evolution of the conversation that France has been developing for 150 years. Thank you for listening to Le Weekend, your one-stop destination for everything we covered this past week in France. Catch our daily France News Brief roundups of the main news in France every weekday, wherever you get your podcasts. Stay informed.